Hey everybody, thank you again for joining me here with Christ and comic books. I'm looking to continue, of course, with the Death Note series because, like I told you all in the last one, we're finally in Volume 3. And I don't know what it was about Volume 3, but the energy, I was just kind of reading. And as I was reading, I was remembering, aren't I supposed to be doing 2 parts per volume? I got so caught up, I was almost done with the book. And again, like I said, I'm rereading the series. I am not just now reading the series, so it's not going to be coming as a surprise. But it's like I'm seeing things that I wasn't seeing the first time that I actually read it. I was just intrigued to see the intellect behind the manga itself and its writing. Um, the thoughts that went through into the challenges that were brought forth, and how it's a lot more talking and a lot more on the human side of things when we're talking human psychology, human intellect, human capability, to the extent that humans are willing to go. Seeing that side without going too mystical is what was so great about this series. It was very strategic. It's almost like playing chess. I mean, you can have your fun seeing the action and the explosions, but at some point you got to see the thought process behind everything that's taking place. And that's what's really going to draw a person into a story. And that's what drew people to Death Note, was we got a new side to the success of shonen manga. Like I said, Volume 3. This volume is featuring Ryuk now. One of the things that is interesting about manga series, just to point out as a side note, is they do try to introduce, as they do their illustrations, who's the most important throughout each book. As we saw, Volume 1 was showing Light on the cover with a black volume. We had L on Volume 2 and a white volume. And now we have Ryuk on a blue volume. So remember, Ryuk is the Shinigami. Now, he plays an important part in the beginning of Volume 3 that I believe is important to point out. So as we left off in the last volume, there are a bunch of cameras in Light's house to observe and determine whether or not Light or anyone in the family is Kira. The similar action is taking place with another chief of the police that's being looked into also. There's cameras in his home. However, I do not believe that there is an awareness there for him, being that he's not actually part of the case. So Captain Yagami, the chief of the NPA, he is aware and knows that the cameras are there, but the other police officer does not. So in the midst of there being cameras in the household, Light made some proper preparations around his room to make sure he could tell the difference. One of which being a paper falling from the edge of the door to let him know that someone's been in his room. Another aspect that he went to make it a step further to know if someone's been in his room, and something even deeper has taken place there, is that he made sure that the door handle was jarred down just slightly every time he leaves his room, to know that there's something else going on. So the reason that he's doing this is to kind of do a double security. One, he did, the normal teen thing to make sure if someone was coming to his room, but he also went the extra mile by making sure that door handle was ajar. So with that being the case, that he noticed someone had been in his room, he now is taking extra precaution in how he approaches his bedroom so that he's not observed. So he goes in the room, he grabs a couple of things, and he leaves. So he ends up having a conversation with Ryuk about the situation, because Ryuk was pestering him as he was in the bedroom, because he wouldn't say anything, and he couldn't figure out why he wouldn't say anything to him. So when they finally get outside, and after checking his clothing, he is able to finally start communicating back with Ryuk. And so he goes to the store, but in the midst of going to the store, him and Ryuk have a very important conversation. The thing about this conversation, though, that I think is important to point out is that Ryuk is expressing a deeper frustration, not about whether or not there are cameras in the room, but that he can't eat apples in the room because they'll see the floating apple. That will give away something, which will lead to more eyes being on Light, which even more so leads to there being eyes on Ryuk. So Light won't give Ryuk any apples. So that leads to them making a separate deal, not the ideal, but a separate deal where either Ryuk helps him find those cameras and figure out how they can work around him being able to eat apples, or otherwise Ryuk can't sit in the room and eat apples. So here's what I want to take a moment to point out about this moment, and then we'll continue. Ryuk and these apples is very significant to the way that the story plays out. So one of the things I want to verify into this, because again, the point of this channel is to, point out where, the biblical side of things correlates with what's taking place in these series. And that apple is symbolic to what takes place in the Garden of Eden, from eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is what Adam and Eve did. And that's something that is quote unquote addictive for Ryuk, because he identifies it's not flavor that draws him to it. It's almost like a drug. The way the humans are about drugs, there's a relapse impact if he doesn't keep getting those apples. He starts to twist up his body in weird forms. He's looking in weird poses. And it's almost like crack for him to be able to eat of these apples. So he points out that particular point, which I think correlates with eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because there's an impact from that impacts the human race from that having taken place, leading, of course, to our downfall. And in him eating of this, it's symbolic not simply to the way that it causes his body to twist, but he doesn't start eating the apple until he starts to observe and find this interest in the corruptive nature and behavior behind human beings, which is why he's following light in the first place. So him eating this apple is symbolic to seeing how human beings behave, being that the fall has taken place. So that is what the necessity to him partaking as a fan of these apples is to what's taking place here. And if you have any more feedback on Ryuk and eating these apples, I'd love to hear from you guys on that. What do you think it means when Ryuk is eating of the apple? What does that mean? Why is it addictive to him? I want to hear back from some of you guys. So, and going forward with this, like we said, Light went to a store a little bit, and then Light comes back home. Light went, and as far as we knew in the moment, he just went and bought some barbecue chips. So he comes home. He, again, doesn't communicate with Ryuk. He makes a deal with Ryuk that he's going to find the camera. So Ryuk is going through the house finding cameras. Light, knowing that there are cameras in his home, is doing normal teenage things to make sure that he isn't identified as Kira. So he's, looking at dirty girl magazines. He has a secret place where he hides dirty girl magazines, where the NPA, when they set up the cameras, did not know that there was a spot for his magazines. So that is something that clued them in. Oh, he's just doing normal teenage things. So he's also thinking, snap, the kills that I did do beforehand that will be happening as I am in my room will take away the attention off of me, but at the same time, I'm not able to sit and just turn on my television to be able to watch these things happen. So he comes up with a different plan where he has a little small radio television that as he's eating chips, he can sit and watch these things, but also he has tagged into the bag of chips a note from the Death Note to be able to take down names as he's watching. So he's able to, do this at the same time. And as he's reaching in to get a chip, he's writing him another letter. He eats a chip. So he has a pencil in the bag as well. So he set this up to where he can continue to kill criminals off, but at the same time not being evidently seen as Kira. So he set up a good plan here. One of the other things that he also did was, as he went downstairs to go eat dinner, he asked if anyone wants to turn on the news, but mom and dad love to watch their normal things. The mom and the daughter like to watch their little drama shows, the TV award shows and things like that. So he wasn't even able to get any opportunity to see the news. So he couldn't even see any names of anyone that has died or anyone that he would observe as deserving to die, visibly. So the NPA would have no reason to suspect Light, right? Another thing they did take into effect was that the other policeman, him and his family were watching things that were linked to the news. So, of course, they're going to continue to consider them to be suspect. So we press forward going into this, and so it leads to time has passed. They're like, okay, we can conclude that Light isn't. Chief Yagami is feeling a bit better about this thing, knowing that he is no longer considered a suspect, but that doesn't mean that L is taking his eyes off of him. It doesn't mean that he is no longer a suspect. It just means that he hasn't done anything for us to suspect him, which is where L is coming from in this instance. So it still has Chief Yagami kind of shaken up, but to continue to support that his family is innocent, he is still going along with everything that's taking place going forward. So this leads to Light graduating high school. He's going to college, and he's sitting down. He's getting ready to test. And as he goes to test, we see that behind him, sitting there, is L. Okay, so he is going, L is sitting there taking the test to get into the college alongside him. Now, Light doesn't acknowledge who he is in this moment. He simply acknowledges that L is someone of a peculiar behavior because L sits with his knees up in his chest, and when he writes, he holds the back of his pencil to write that way. He's very connected but disconnected at the same time. It's an interesting behavior. I want to get into that at the end of this, so we'll continue forward with what actually takes place in the volume. So we see this behavior of him. It comes time for the acceptances of the people getting into the college, and it turns out that there's two people that made the highest grades, which is 100%. Here's how we acknowledge this: is the people are talking about them as Light comes up to accept his reward and do a speech, but also L comes up to accept the reward and do his speech. And the people are acknowledging, they made the highest grades out of any of us, but they're two totally different types of people. You have the well-dressed, well-mannered, sleek hair, seems rather privileged Light, but then you have the dressed down, not even wearing any socks, wearing a long-sleeve white tee, blue jeans, and tennis shoes, L. So you see that there are two totally different people that are being portrayed here. So after they do their speeches, they're coming down, and L reveals himself to Light. Now, I don't mean he gives his actual name. What I mean is he tells him, "I'm L. I know who you are." And that catches him off guard because he wasn't prepared to have been introduced to L. He knew this was a peculiar person, but he didn't know that it had gotten to this point to where L is right beside him and there's nothing that he can do. He's thinking in this moment, I have to be careful how I behave. I have to be careful what I do because now I'm face to face with my opponent, with the person that's hindering me from doing fully what I'm looking to do. So this really makes this a challenge for Light. But Light behaves in a proper fashion in response to this, of course, giving the imagery of, "Oh, it's nice to meet you. Oh my goodness, I would," kind of surprised, but it wasn't showing on his face. So he kind of makes himself evident to him in the sense of, "I'm Light Yagami. I know who you are. As someone aspiring, quote unquote, to be a detective, let's build a relationship." That's really kind of what comes into play here. And they start to talk a bit more, but you can see it playing out in Light's head, the shock from what has happened. Even goes even deeper that as they go to leave, I want to point this out for just a little bit, that they're going to leave and they think L a poor state, but as L goes to leave, you see L getting in a very high-class vehicle with Watari waiting on him, so that shows that I may not dress the part, but I am the part. I've shown myself in my testing, I've shown myself with my riches, I'm qualified. In essence. So this goes a bit further to lead to Light going home. Light sits down. Ryuk is acknowledging, okay, hey, the camera's gone, you can talk to me. And you see Light kind of have a breakdown. He's like, he's got me. I'm shocked. He's like, he's brought everything before me, and he's getting so frustrated that he starts to blame Ryuk because Ryuk again makes that move. Hey, I can offer the deal with you. Why would I do that? Why would I cut down my lifespan? You could have helped me in this, and they're kind of just fussing at himself for not having been prepared for L coming to meet with him face to face. Because if he kills him off now, that instantly makes him a suspect because, of course, L is directly watching him. So this puts him in a very high conundrum to be in this position. Now he knows that I can't conduct myself the way that I have been. I need to be very careful about how I play this now. I have to play this smart. Not only so that I don't get caught, but so that I can catch L. So that's the two things that's going through Light's mind. Because although he was shook by this portion of this panel ends, or the portion of these couple of pages where he's home, ends with him laughing because now the game has been stepped up a notch. Although he hates to lose, you can tell that Light does love the challenge. This moves forward with a little scene where you find that Chief Yagami is speaking with the other head officer, actually his boss, who was one of the other people being monitored. And, they're addressing how no one's been in the office except one person. What have you guys been doing? Who have you guys been talking to? But Chief Yagami can't reveal anything because it's so top secret. So the boss is basically just having to trust that something's being done to deal with the Kira case, basically, without revealing anything. But he does he does kind of hint to a couple of things to let him know that we are working. And even more so, can we still trust L? Can we still trust L? So there's like a little issue with knowing, are we going in the right direction by what we're doing here? And that's probably giving the two sides of what Chief Yagami is dealing with as a father as well as an officer. Is what we're doing leading us to actually catching Kira? So that's what's baffling him at this time. And you can see the ruggedness on his face, you can see the restlessness, you can see the stress, because they do a great job of detailing that. Again, kudos to Takeshi Obata for his artwork. The other thing I really want to lead into as we come close to the end here, as far as the volume goes, what takes place next is it leads to Light and L having a tennis match between each other. Another factor here is he goes by, I think it's Hibaki Ryuga, which at least for the series, is a very popular Japanese pop star. So being that he was given such a popular name, a very evident name, Light also recognized, I can't simply write this name down. One, because it could be the wrong name and end up killing that pop star. Also because if the Death Note, goes by the name or the face that you see with the name that you're writing, so they both have to match. And if he writes that man's name, he pictures a Japanese pop star, it'll be the pop star that dies. And that will lead to him suspecting, oh, this person who goes by that name and this pop star happens to die, instant suspect, instant judgment will be brought down on Light to be Kira. But shifting over back to the tennis match. So we're going into this tennis match, you see that L reveals that he actually was a champion back in, I believe it was in Britain. He was a champion there. And that kind of took Light aback to notice that, okay, so, you're a champion. You're not just some basic, tennis player. I haven't played tennis in a while. They go to the court, and immediately L gets, a point on Light. And that took Light by shock. Because one thing that you see in the mind of L, because in this moment, although they're having their personal conversation where it seems friendly, you see in their heads that they're both strategizing what the meaning of this tennis match would take place as they go back and forth. So attention is being drawn to this match because you see it's a very high skilled level in which they're both playing. Some of the other tennis actual club members observe this, and it's reviewed that not only was L a champion, but Light was a champion in high school as well. The thing about that is the tennis club could not identify anything on L, but they could at least identify for Light. So publicly it's evident how popular Light is, but it's not publicly evident how popular L is. L is making himself evident in his actual performance in this match. And they're going back and forth over and over, skill for skill, and it's so high class that it has people shocked. Light, however, in this moment, he's playing, and he couldn't help but be himself, which is, I have to win. L, believing that, he knows that Kira is someone that doesn't like to lose, so he's associating that with Light. Although it's not conveying to him that he is Kira directly, it does lead to him giving more percentage to it, concluding that Light could be Kira, because even in this, he won't hesitate to try and win. But we'll see exactly what he does. And Light doesn't know, if I play to win, will this give me away? Or if I play and just lose, will that also give me away because I'm holding back? So he has to play at his top performance, and so does L. And this is where I kind of want to end here because of this mental battle. Because I see so much biblical significance between the relationship between L and Light. With L, you see so much Christ reference. And here's why I want to say that. So biblically, you see that Jesus gives himself off to be someone of poor estate as far, because he doesn't go for the high class look of the jewelry adorning his clothing, trying to embellish money from people, trying to look as the best of the best. But one thing you notice in the biblical writings from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you see that Jesus is someone who's qualified for the position that he was in. One of the examples I always like to use to show that Jesus Christ, when he was living in the world, he educated himself. He earned the certificate, so to speak, for his teachings. That's why people always called him a master teacher. That's why they always called him rabbi, because in the natural, he did the studies, he passed the classes, he asked the questions, he proved himself to be a wise person. So that's why even he was able to go into the temple, and when they were doing the gambling and the underground stuff they shouldn't have been doing, he was able to kick them out, because no normal man of mad mind would be able to simply kick other leaders out of the temple. He would have had to have been qualified to even be in the temple to kick these people out of the temple. And even more so, we saw from when he was a child, he couldn't help but be in the temple and speak amongst the other leaders and teachers to develop that wisdom. So Christ showed himself qualified without quote unquote dressing the part. He may not have looked as though he was qualified, but he definitely demonstrated his qualification. We see that with L. He didn't dress the part as a good student, but he showed himself to be intellectual. And even more so, he showed himself to be physically skillful, as he was able to play tennis at the level that Light himself was. So they looked different, but they were both the same. This is what's so significant there. And another thing about that tennis match leads me to bring up my question, because we see that Christ, of course, constantly is contending with the ignorance of the world, as well as the spiritual warfare that took place between him and those that were looking to continue with their practices and sinful behavior. So that brings me to my question at the end of this video. Who do you think light represents from a biblical sense? I've debated this within myself for a while. Does light represent the flesh and sin? Does light represent the chief priests and those that were trying to trick Jesus and come against him? Or does light represent the devil and the control and power that he had over the rest of the world before Christ came? Because we see that light was able to freely, just kill off people. Now he had to be careful once Christ came, or once El came, which is the same thing that's happening. The same thing that happened in the Bible is now these leaders couldn't just free willy-nilly behave as they were, because now they're being watched by someone that's a genuine teacher. Same thing with Light. He can't continue all willy-nilly because now he's being watched by a genuine detective. So this puts him in a tough spot. But I want to hear what you think. Who does light represent from a biblical sense? What is his symbolism? Let me hear from you guys. Please go to the bottom, hit subscribe. I'd love to get a like, but most importantly, leave a comment, leave your feedback. I want to hear from you, from the people. Thank you. Y'all have a blessed one.